On tonight's program, we talk about the new Foundry featured episode series. So far, the response has really been excellent overall.
Seems like.
Dialog tags and the various ways to use them.
Like, I often use it for stage directions, or for a description of something that, like, I want people to know what something looks like up close in their hand.
And what predictions do we have for the coming year?
We're going to see a lot. I don't know how much new tech we're going to see, but we have heard them talking about wanting to bring in new tech.
All ahead on the Foundry Roundtable. Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the Foundry Roundtable, a podcast exclusively covering the Foundry for Star Trek Online. I'm your tame Foundry author, Drogon1701. With me is a man who was furloughed this week from his other job as an NSA spy, Greendragoon. Was I not supposed to say that?
We don't talk about that.
We also have a man who once claimed to be Tom Clancy's second cousin once removed on his mother's side, Markhawkman.
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
And the real-life inspiration behind Breaking Bad, Hippiejohn.
Whoa, no. No, wrong drug. Wrong drug.
Before we get into anything in particular tonight, there's one thing I forgot to do last week, which is say that Hippiejohn has gotten involved in another podcast. We're not viewing this as a traitorous act, but rather something kind of cool. I thought I'd give him a couple of minutes here to plug it a little bit if he would like.
Keep on trekking live on Friday nights for me Mountain Time. It's 5 o'clock till 7. So, for people on the East, it's 7 until 9. It's just kind of a Trek podcast. I'm the co-host. I try to keep all the trains running on time and stuff like that. It's another, so some other fools gave me a spot to talk about my opinions, so I do on Friday nights live, 5 to 7 on Black Star Radio. That's what I'm doing.
Sounds like fun.
It covers news, and that's basically, it covers news, and every week we watch an episode and have a chat about the episode. That's it.
I think that's kind of cool, actually, and I tuned in a little bit last week because I was stuck late at work, but enjoyed it, and I think I will listen in again if I have the time.
Right on.
Well, we only have really one bit of Foundry news this week, which we talked about last week as well. The Purity Foundry feature series has launched. Purity 1 of Denial is out by Zorbane. The mission is spotlighted, so it's easy to find. Second episode, which will be by Bazag, is coming out on Tuesday. So far, the response has really been excellent overall.
Seems like.
As of Wednesday night when we're recording this, it has 616 reviews, and that's in, I don't know, what is it, like about 30 hours that it's been up, essentially.
Yeah.
It's pretty good, I'd say. Overwhelmingly positive feedback, 447 5 stars. That's just incredible. So I think people are really responding to what we're doing. And I wanted to ask,
they like the general story.
Apparently. But I wanted to ask Mark and Greendragoon, since they're the two of us who have not been involved in this series. I don't know, what do you guys think of this project?
I like the idea of the project. I haven't actually played the mission yet, but I like the concept behind the project.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to play it. I haven't had a chance yet. I've just been busy. But yeah, I mean, more power to the Foundry.
Do you think either of you would ever do a collaborative effort like this?
You mean while you wait a year for me to do my part?
Obviously, we would have to make you speed up a little.
I'd be willing to do it if I had the time. I haven't had the time lately, though.
It certainly is a time commitment.
Yeah,
as you know, I'm one of the authors, so I know.
I would have to be much more organized about it than I normally am with a mission.
And of course, there's other roles than just mission author in there. I mean, there's, overall story. There's, we had a guy designed the costumes. We had a couple people build maps.
Yep.
So you could fill one of those roles.
I mean,
True.
My whole contribution was being part of the story conversations and being a playtester. That's been my contribution. I haven't built any of the missions. I know my limitations is part of it. You know, I'm quite capable of making cartoons, but, you know, seeing what other people can do, you know, there's no reason to say that I'm one of the six that should be building missions here, kind of deal.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because, you know, there's been a lot of talk. Obviously, this featured series is only for Fed, and, you know, there's some KDF people felt a little left out. Mm-hmm. But one of our main goals for this thing was to sort of, you know, get the Foundry back in the public eye, get people inspired to make their own collaborative mission series. And, you know, I'd love to see a Klingon series, and love to see it spotlighted on the same level that we're getting. I'm sure Brand Flakes would go for it.
Yeah, so that's kind of a thing that I'm feeling about any of the complaints. I'm a Klingon player. When I play the game, I prefer to be playing my Klingon characters. It's the way I play the game. So, yeah, I'm not getting to, you know, I can understand that this isn't a featured, or that this isn't an episode series for Klingons, but really, shouldn't this just be kind of an inspiration to those Foundry authors who do work on the Klingon side, who previously have said, you know, working in a collaborative effort is just too difficult. We don't have the tools or whatever. They're seeing that something, at least here in the first week, from everything, you know, they can see what, you know, the first week, months of work from, a dozen or so people, like 10 to 12 people, what that represents. So I'm really all about, hey, all of you people who want to see a Klingon featured episode, get together, let's do it. Get together,
let's do it. Not to mention that doing something like this on the Romulan side could prove a huge boost towards trying to get proper Romulan Foundry missions.
Well, I have to say that people really seem to like the idea of doing Klingon missions that deal with the Dominion. I mean, that's one of the feedback things I got from doing diplomacy in the Gamma Quadrant.
And that's the one thing that when you're doing a collaborative mission, I mean, the first thing you ought to do is figure out what the story's going to be. And how we did it is we just sort of got on Skype and just started throwing around ideas.
Yeah, it's throw around ideas, realize that no idea that you have is too stupid, but realize that no matter how great an idea is, it might not be used in the final soup, because what's being created is an idea. I call it like an idea soup, because it's the things that everyone brought to the table creates a story that none of you could have anticipated. And maybe your ideas used my biggest thing is always leave your ego at the door for a collaborative effort. It's the only way to make it work.
And in this series, the story ended up being something that I had come up with like a year or more ago, but in a very different form and very different missions that, you know, when you get right down to the missions, very different than what I had envisioned. And I think it's fantastic.
I mean, and how many, cool concepts have we come up with just by trying to hash it out here on the show?
Oh yeah. Just brainstorming with you guys has made my missions much better. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, even that little level of collaboration is awesome. Well, moving along, what we've been working on. Mark, have you been able to get in the Foundry this week?
I did do a little bit of tinkering, but had more to do with trying to figure out what somebody on the forum was talking about with the bug that they were having an issue with.
What bug was that?
I don't remember exactly. I think it was that. Oh, it was that thing that the guy mentioned about getting an error where he attempted to open the the Foundry for editing, and it would give them a Foundry editing not allowed error message.
Oh,
I know
yeah.
what you're talking about.
That one happened to me once.
It's not specific to the Foundry. It can actually happen in the other direction too. Loading up the main game, although the error message it gives is different. But yeah, it's
and it's caused, as far as we can tell, right, by hitting play before your character visually loads in, right?
Yeah.
The way it acts is like the game is confused as to which character you're trying to edit the Foundry with. And it thinks you're using the wrong one, so it tells you to go away.
Yeah, and this is kind of like a host of number of bugs specifically rated to the character selector that kind of have cropped up since Legacy of Ramis. They're not really all specific to the Foundry.
Oh, so it's Thomas the Cat's fault.
I don't know about that. I don't know if Thomas does the actual programming for the back end, but
probably not.
Sure, let's bring Thomas.
Yeah, let's blame Thomas because he's the person I know. So
Captain Gecko will back us up.
There we go. All right. So Greendragoon, I assume you've been working on part 2.
I have been working on part 2, not quite as much as I would have liked. I've had a lot of distractions going on lately. Mostly I've been pretty much focused down to map 8, which is, I think I've mentioned before, the big giant map. It's also the most complicated, and it'll probably be a while yet that I'll still be working on it, just trying to hook everything up. I mean, there's a big, massive puzzle that kind of acts as the spine through the map, and it's just hooking this up. It's got a lot of different interactions. I've been taking advantage of the new Dialog prompt reach expansion, and so I was able to actually save myself a few items on a very crowded map by reducing down the number of consoles I needed. Because before I had two versions, a locked version and an unlocked version, and basically trying to I would have to swap between them once the door was unlocked. But the problem with that is that, I mean, it basically meant I had to have 2 copies of every console. Now, thankfully to this, I mean, I can now swap and track exactly when they reach the unlocks dialogue, so I can contain that all within one console with a default dialogue. The other thing I've been doing,
nice.
I mean, it's one of those things I've been kind of sussing it out and figuring out exactly how it works. The other thing I've been doing, playing around with, and unfortunately it hasn't been proving as successful as I would have liked, is the idea of using those plasma leaks as light sources. And I actually did find out that there is a very fine, happy medium between the plasma leak being far enough away that you can't, or you can only barely hear it, and it having close enough to still to cast light on things. The downside I ran into, though, is that apparently it does cast light on, like, the scene and detail objects. It does not cast light on the characters. And that was kind of the big thing I needed more light on. So I ended up kind of scrapping it for now, but who knows, I might use it in the future.
That's odd, but useful information.
Yeah, I think it had to be like 22 away from above the player, somewhere right around there to where it was just close enough to cast light, but just far enough to so you didn't hear this sound.
I guess it'd be a lot more fun if you had an environment where you had a reason to have a loud whooshing noise.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, if you are looking to kind of add a little bit of accent light to your custom interior map, it might be workable for some people. Like I said, I mean, it's not going to help with like increasing the key light for your characters or anything like that, which is kind of one of the main problems of building in the black space.
Hippiejohn, what have you been working on?
Well, I avoid building in the black space, actually, for some of those reasons. And also because I don't trust the black space. I don't trust that it will always be there. For some reason, when I started building in the Foundry, actually, I felt that way. And then when the most recent update shrank the black space and killed some maps and stuff, I was like, aha!
I'm still not sure what I'm going to do with the Beta-Rana incident.
Yeah, I'm telling you that Cavo 202 is perfect for receiving copies of Massive Interiors.
Right. But what have I been working on? The same thing I'm working on every week, Brain. Trying to take over the world. Actually, at this point, what I'm working on is really what I've been working on every week, a little bit at a time, and now I'm just working on it more at a time. So every week from here on out, I'll have more to actually talk about, because the deadline for the challenge, the latest Foundry challenge, where the whole thing is your plot has to center on going to the past somehow. How far you go and the method of getting there, et cetera, is up to you. So I'm at this point, I've created nearly 50 costumes for this challenge. I am doing more with triggering things to appear and disappear, because someone on the forums, for the life of me, I can't think of who it was, I'm sorry to whoever it was, asked a question about how to use reach markers and what are they good for. And it got me to answering the question of, well, I use them for triggers for things, and I realized they're one of the simplest triggers to use actually on an indoor map, on a space station or a place like that. So I've started saying it's really easy for me to trigger a bunch of things, the states of objects, the states of NPCs and NPC groups and that kind of thing, so that it's not perfect. It's as limited as I can figure out how to do at the moment with the time that I have, but I can have you walking up a hallway, and when you hit the trigger markers, have the NPCs that you're supposed to be on this adventure with, because there's a lot of them, appear around you for the conversation or for the battle, even in some cases that's going to happen, and then using those same triggers for making things disappear and appear around you. So I'm doing more of that, and I finally have all of the maps done, and I'm filling in those special effects occurring where they occur. So that's been really fun. Once again, I've got a whole bunch of brightly colored things everywhere, so hopefully it feels enough like a cartoon. It's a little more in depth, and it's a little bit thicker plot-wise than the last thing that I did, but, maybe it'll take even a little bit longer, but that's okay by me. For it to take a little bit longer. It's a part 2. I've never done a series before, and I'm almost shocked that my first series is going to be Miranda and the Mayhems and their adventures, but, there you have it.
Well, there was also somebody on the forums who was having issues with getting triggers to work, and apparently he hadn't noticed that you need to set the radius for triggers. Yeah,
that they didn't notice that you, because my favorite thing about them is most indoor or even on the ground scenarios, you can more or less anticipate how a character is going to go. Through hallways, it's even easier, because you know exactly how they're going to walk, and you make sure that the radius covers the entire hallway. That makes reach markers a very, very reliable trigger to change the states of things, or, use them as explosion triggers and such. All of that is just kind of what I've been working on making happen. So.
Yeah, you were talking about, things, making things happen around the player using reach markers, because of course the player doesn't see the reach marker if it's not tied to an objective, so you sort of,
right.
It's a way to just pop things off around them without any warning. That was, you remember I guess it's been a month or more now, when we reviewed Stout's mission, I think it was, he had that brilliant interior map where the Borg cube is essentially exploding around you. And I'm going to assume he did most of it with reach markers.
Yeah. Is that the first part of Collectiveness Strikes Gold?
Yeah.
hey, that's when I get back to my now very short list of missions to review. I say a short list, but one of those is like, a 3-mission series and, things like that, et cetera, et cetera. But hey, that is one of the first couple on the missions I'm going to review. Once I'm done giving my very basic, non-spoilery review of whatever Purity is released every week. So
fantastic. I did a similar thing in one of my missions, which is not published at this moment, where I had a ship exploding around you. It's a lot of fun, and the effect is really cool. Well, let's see. I've been working on my own mission for the Purity series. I can't talk too much about it, but I was conversing over Twitter with Greendragoon about something that I wanted to talk about, which is I got this point where I want you to choose an officer to send on an away mission. You're going to get the choice of 3 specialists, and actually there's going to be 3 people who aren't exactly specialized in what you need, but they're the closest thing you have on board. And so you're going to get the choice of 3 people to do it. And so I want you to make this choice in Dialog, have an interact object where you beam them over to a satellite, and then I want to have you interact with only the person you send, in the next dialogue tree as they report into you about what they're doing on that satellite. So I was asking Greendragoon, because he is the master of dialogue and triggers and knowing what's what. and I want to make sure I've got this correct. Okay, so I have a map dialogue which branches out into talking about these 3 people, and it ends with you making the choice of, 1, 2, or 3. And then I have an interact with objective, and then another map dialogue in which different windows will open based on, and you can set those, I think, buttons to appear based on dialogue prompt reached.
Yep.
From that original first map and here's my question: does it have to be map dialogue, or can I set that to trigger off of dialogue prompt reached in a objective dialogue?
You can do an objective or dialogue with contact. It'll work for that. It will not work for storyboard pop-up dialogues.
Okay. So I may need to either do it with a map dialogue that just goes right as the mission, right as you zone in.
Okay. And you can often trigger a map dialogue off of the same interact that you're checking off an objective off of, to kind of fake it as a pop-up dialogue. Because, the user can't tell the difference between a map dialogue and a storyboard dialogue.
Yeah. Except that an objective won't update. The objectives will look slightly different.
It will if the objective is using the same interact object as the map dialogue.
Because here's the question. I assume most people, if you zone into a map and a dialogue pops up, you're going to click through that dialogue and hopefully read it before you do anything else.
Yeah. Unless it gets interrupted by something.
Yeah. Which in this case it will not.
Yeah. Like I said, player can't normally tell the difference.
Yeah. Because I did this once before, and I did it across maps, and obviously this one is going to just be all on the same map. But how I did it before was I had you make the choice in dialogue of, I'm going to send this officer, or this officer. In this case, it was a very old mission. I was sending them, it was a data on the Sutherland kind of a thing where a ship in your task force did not have a captain, so you got to choose one of your officers on your ship to go and captain it. These were officers that I had invented. They weren't your bridge officers or anything. And then later on, you hear about what happened to that officer. And how I did it was I just didn't refer to them by name. I just had somebody call up and say, hey, something happened to your officer. So, yeah, but this time I wanted you to actually interact with your choice later on as they report into you.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind also is that since the first dialogue of a dialogue tree doesn't come from a choice. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that one has to be the same no matter what.
Yeah, and I've planned for that.
Okay.
Because essentially, when you say, when you do the interact with object, then the next thing is a storyboard dialogue. And the first one will be one of your bridge officers on your ship saying, so-and-so is reporting in, sir.
Okay.
And then I'll figure out a way to do something with that. We'll see.
Another thing you can do is you can trigger other map dialogues, and then, never mind. That wouldn't work.
It's going to be a little complex, and I'm going to have to really sit down and take an afternoon and make sure it's all correct, but I got to write it out first, so I have that at my disposal to copy and paste into the thing. And I have to come up with names for the 3 officers. That's kind of a pain in the butt sometimes. But I want them to all have very different personalities, have one be sort of acerbic, and, say, ask them how they're doing, and says, leave me alone, I know what I'm doing. and another one who, gives you overly detailed explanations of everything they're doing, and you just want to say, shut up and do it already.
I love that character in every
I've done one of those characters.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's going to be a fun little thing. It's going to be something that takes, a minute or two to really get through if you're reading it, but I think it's going to be fun. So
if you want to make the overly detailed one a ensign named T-Lock, you are welcome to.
Well, I got to see first if any of the other guys in the series have invented characters for the player ship, so I could carry them through if possible. But we'll see. I could always use some that I've invented. Hopefully I haven't killed them all off. I don't know. I actually like inventing sort of junior officers for the player ship. I think that's a topic we've talked about before. Yeah.
It's definitely doable. I mean, there's a few traps to watch out for, but as long as the player understands or has a legitimate reason for not immediately knowing who that character is.
I'll tell you.
You could do the approach that they did in Doomsday Machine, where it's a liaison officer who gets temporarily assigned to your ship, who you're interacting with.
That's possible, but I don't think it would work with the story in this case.
Yeah, but I mean, they did it all the time in Star Trek, where they would introduce some other character on the crew, but the audience doesn't know, so there's usually some kind of lead-in. Especially, like I said, using
I just transferred in last week.
Yeah. No, I mean, even just a bridge officer saying, Lieutenant so-and-so would be good for this.
And that's the idea, is on one map, you're going to have a bridge officer who says, I don't think we have anyone on board who's exactly specialized in this. I will go off and research and see who are some good candidates who could do this work, and I'll get back to you. Then when you get into this map, the officer pipes up the very first thing and says, I have some recommendations for you of who to send. Yeah, and this is actually kind of a lot of the kind of thing that a first officer would do. Although we can't specifically call on the first officer. I mean, I'm just going to pick a bridge officer. Probably science, because it's going to be a sort of a sciencey thing. Yeah. Well, I don't know. It could be engineering. I'll have to think about that. So, moving on, why don't we do our tech topic?
Okay. Yeah. Well, why don't you, since you're the one who actually came up with it, why don't you lead it off?
All right. Well, Dragoon was asking about potential tech topics this week, and I said, how about dialogue tags? Now, these are the little things in brackets that we now have buttons for, thankfully, that you can put into your mission so that it does certain things in the dialogue. It tells the dialogue to do certain things, like put it in green text, which was it mission text? Is that what the name is?
Mission info is green.
Mission info. And OOC, which turns it gold, and you can put in a rank, which tells it to put in the player's rank there. There's all different kinds of things you can do with it. And I was going to ask you guys, what are some of the things that you have done using these tags?
Well, let's talk about it basically falls under 3 different tabs: fonts, names, and ship. So why don't we focus on first fonts, the 2 mission info and out of character. I mean, there are a lot of different ways you can use this outside of just their initial intended purpose.
Outside of their intended purpose. I've seen people use them for dialogue. I like them a lot, to be quite honest. I use them for stage directions.
Yeah.
I mentioned in the past about this, that in the Beta Rana incident, there's this occasion where your character goes up to a Boslik who is an administrator on the starbase that you go to, but while you're talking to the Boslik starts talking to a Tholian, and even though you can't understand what the Tholian's saying, you see these bits of yellow text pop up on the screen to, well, they don't really tell you exactly what the Tholian's saying, but it shows you what the Boslik person is reacting to when she starts talking to the Tholian.
So it's like a paraphrase translation.
No, it's more like kind of like what Hippie said with stage directions, but it's stuff like you hear the Tholian to your right start making screeching noises.
Oh, okay.
That's the sort of text that actually pops up, that what the player sees when they're reading it. But the Boslik character reacts to that as though she's listening to someone standing next to her talking.
And this mission was made out back before we had NPC, or before we had Tholian contacts, right?
Right.
Yes.
So he wouldn't have been able to put a Tholian in the...
I had the Tholian guy off behind one of those invisible barrier things.
Mm.
Yeah, but you couldn't have put it into the dialogue because of that, right?
Right.
Yeah, you wouldn't have the Tholian appearing in the dialogue window.
Cool, though, watching the Tholian captain NPC going through his idle animations while he's standing there.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've used the OOC text specifically for is instructions to the player, such as if I want them to go somewhere off on their own, I will instruct them to leave their officers here, and click the, I don't know, whatever you call it, the waypoints button, and put them here.
Well, that kind of gets under, and a good point is, sticking to its intended purpose, what the different uses of mission info and out of character are. And that's kind of what you just kind of gave an example as what mission info is. It's basically instructions to the player in order to complete the mission, or extra information that they might need as
that's
it
what
relates
it's supposed. That's one way it's supposed to be used. Yeah. Like I often use it for stage directions, or for a description of something that, like, I want people to know what something looks like up close in their hand. I have no way of making the game show them that, so I'll describe it in a quick sentence in the green text.
Well, that's kind of what I always expected out of character. Primary function was to kind of fill in those.
I just
things
hate
that
orange. I just hate the orange. That's it.
The only thing I would be careful about in that situation is this is kind of how it's used in cryptic missions, so it's kind of the way the player is somewhat conditioned by the time they get into the Foundry.
Yep.
Is their eye will go to the green text.
Yeah, the green text is stuff I need to do. Orange text is descriptions outside of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But
we've seen people use them in unconventional ways.
Yeah. Something I've been doing, and actually this is something I kind of borrowed from Cryptic, is I mentioned that I've got all of these computer consoles around, and oftentimes it'll be giving systems layout information or system information. So for instance, one of them is, I mentioned you're unlocking doors, and there will be like little status indicators that are like door is locked, door is unlocked, or status unlocked. And so I will actually use out of character orange text as locked, kind of the equivalent of red text. And then when it switches to unlocked, I'll switch it over to green text to kind of give that feeling of status indicators on a console, even though it's text.
Mm-hmm. Some of the things I've seen people use it for is captain dialogue. So essentially, it gives you a choice of a couple of different styles of responses in the buttons. Then on the next dialogue, it starts off with what your captain says in gold, I think is what I've seen it in the OOC text. And then it will proceed to what the NPC says in response. And this, if you want to do it this way, this kind of allows you to make a more elaborate set of captain dialogue than just what can fit in that little button. And of course, sometimes, and I've been guilty of this, is sometimes players skip over and don't really even read what's on the button, but they'll read what's in gold text. because it stands out.
Yeah.
True.
So, I mean, that's the reason to do it. I mean, I suppose you also run the risk of confusing the player if they don't realize that your captain is speaking in that gold text.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a departure from the status quo, and I
think
don't want to say I haven't
did that in one of his missions. Because he had a bunch of things where you would read this 2 or 3 page long conversation between your character and someone else at certain points in the mission anyway. And that's what he did, was he would have the NPC text in white and what your character was saying in yellow.
Yeah.
I have a question, Dragoon. It sounds like I'm hearing that departure from the way that missions are done normally, you would advise against it, generally speaking, it sounds like.
So I have a kind of this general policy on what I like to call Foundry limitations. And these are basically things that we kind of have to step outside of the norm in order to get around in the Foundry. Now, I am not going to say never do any of these. In fact, I can almost guarantee that unless you are like a master of Foundry manipulation, you will end up doing hitting some kind of Foundry limitation and having to work around it in some thing. I mean, for instance, like going to your ship interior and the fact that your characters beam in. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. It's just the way it is. It's either completely scrap doing that or live with it. So my policy is that Foundry limitations are okay. But I try to keep them to a minimum. If at some point you just keep asking the player to kind of step out of his immersion, eventually he'll kind of become unimmersed. So, yeah,
right.
It's not a don't do it, it's a keep it to a minimum. But then again, I'm also an author who obsesses about immersion a lot more than other people. So take what I say with a grain of salt. I mean, the Foundry is very much a creative tool that can be used in enormously different ways. So my advice is those trying to build deeper immersion, but that doesn't mean that there aren't authors that also choose to take a different path and can succeed at it.
I would say this, be consistent with yourself.
Yeah.
If you are using OOC text or mission text in a certain way, make sure you use that in that same way throughout the mission. Don't change up styles in the middle.
That's what it is to me. As long as something is internally consistent, I'm good with it.
Once the player figures out the difference from what he's used to seeing in cryptic missions, they'll go with it for the rest of the mission. As long as
and I've had several missions that maybe threw me off on the initial variation, but were consistent enough throughout that by the second or third time it didn't like jump out at me anymore, because I had been kind of retrained, at least for that mission, to expect it.
Yeah, it's just more confusing if it happens several different ways in your mission than if you do it one way and stick with it.
Yeah. But I mean, it's ultimately up to the author on how they want to try to convey the story.
All right.
There's no perfect interpretation.
There's no one right way to do any of this.
Right.
I would say. And some people, of course, take great delight and great pride in deviating for what Cryptic does. So that's a legit thing too. Let's see. Anything else you guys can think of with tags?
There's 2 other sections. We've got the name tags.
Hey, there we go.
So there's actually 4 of them. There's first name, last name, nickname, and rank.
What is nickname?
Nickname
I never use it.
Nickname is, okay, so you know how you've got your first name and your last name, but then you've also got your character name, which is what you
okay. It's the one
created you character. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's whatever
I've
that
seen
character.
strange things that happen if you actually use the first name tag followed by the last name tag, because if you do that and put both tags side by side, 9 times out of 10 it'll work right, and then you'll run into somebody who has as their character name Beltran and nothing else.
And
so what
does it
happens
list it
then
twice?
is that it says Beltran, and looks screwy.
Yeah, I see that with my Foundry test character because he just has one name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see why they did it that way, to kind of prevent, they only put in a first name and all of our tags use last name, to prevent it from just being a bunch of empty things.
Well,
But yeah, that's
you can just use the full name tags instead, though.
there is no full name tag.
What? I thought there was one.
There is for ship, not for character.
Oh.
Yeah, so at the end we can get into tags we wish there were. One thing I did want to bring up with is, when do you guys ever use the first name? I mean, and if so, when do you use the first name?
It's very occasionally. I mean, when the player is meant to be on a first name basis with the NPC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes when it's like a superior officer, because you notice, something like, Captain Janeway always called Harry Kim Harry. So I mean, if you got an admiral that you're supposed to have at least a passing familiarity with, sometimes I'll have him call you by your first name.
I will say, I generally advise against using the first name in bridge officer dialogue. I know I've run across a few authors who have expected my bridge officers to have a much more
that would be a
much closer relationship than they actually do.
I mean, obviously for most Starfleet crews, there's a lot more formality than that, and for Klingon crews, that's a good way to get your head chopped off.
There have been some missions I played where I've been like, man, I would kill you for that. As my Klingon character.
That airlock has a use,
Yeah, it's like, I would kill you for that.
And then you have the people KDF side who play Orion or Kryosians or other races that don't think that way. So, Of course, that gets back into the old topic about how to write KDF missions for races other than Klingon.
Alright, so I'll hit the last tab real quick, and that is ship, and we have three options here. We have the name, we have the full name, and the designation.
Now designation is like what, the registry number, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so it'd be NZC-991949 or something like that. Full name would be USS such and such, or was it IKS? Yeah, it's IKS, isn't it? For the Klingon side?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, if you have a weird registry, it'll use that too.
Yeah, so
it'll use whatever registry you set it to.
And then of course name is just the name of the ship minus the USS or whatever. So like I'm from the ship name, which is probably the one you'll actually end up using the most. I almost only use designation for like when I'm like listing a log or something like that, where the full designation would get included.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that would come up very much in just casual conversation.
A time when you're being faced by the Borg ship, and they go to the trouble to quote out the entire name and designation.
The one time I can remember it being used in Star Trek is in Star Trek 6, when the crew is being shuttled up to the Enterprise in space dock. There's a little flight controller voice that says, now en route to 1701 Alpha.
Uh-huh.
So, flight controller stuff. That could be a place to use it.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, so yeah, there's lots of subtle times
that.
You can
flight
use
controllers
that.
use it?
Yeah, that was the same sort of thing like what I said with the Rear Admiral earlier, that it's kind of like a formal introduction.
Oh, and Mark, you brought up an excellent point, is that, unfortunately the rank will list out the entire rank. So it'll be Fleet Admiral, it'll be Rear Admiral upper half, and you said there was actually a couple of, very odd sounding ranks in the, Romulan side, like Sub Admiral 2 and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Ones that sound just a little awkward in speech.
Yeah. So you wouldn't say Sub Admiral 2 Talaris. But yeah, it'd be nice if we...
I wouldn't say that, but...
I mean, that's a great segue into what do we kind of wish that we had for, tags.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to have the shortened version of Admiral. Four times when it's, it's a slightly less formal situation where you're not addressing someone by their full rank, you just want to shorten it to Admiral.
Yeah. I've also noticed that Lieutenant Commander often gets shortened to Commander.
Yeah.
So it would be Commander Data, would be the shorthand for Lieutenant Commander Data.
Yeah. I mean, in the actual real world military, all of the lieutenant ranks tend to get called lieutenants, regardless of whether they're first lieutenants, second lieutenants, etc.
Yeah, and we don't have this as an active rank in STO for players, but there's actually a lieutenant junior grade rank that
which you can put on your rank pips, though.
Yeah, they do offer the rank pips for it, but no, you don't spend any time as a lieutenant junior grade, oddly enough.
I wish that we did. I really do. I really wish that we
honestly,
had that as
if
a rank.
If it was up to me, we would spend our entire in-game as captain, and there wouldn't be any admiral ranks.
Well, honestly though, lieutenant junior grade you could actually wedge it into the current rank system so that lieutenant junior grade is ranks 1 through 5 or something like that. I mean, that would work the same way as they have rear admiral upper half and lower half.
And then in the theory, there's also a Commodore rank in between captain and admiral.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, but we only ever heard of a Commodore in the original series. Maybe once or twice.
I believe Commodore Decker in the Doomsday Machine, for sure. I think it was because it became more... Roddenberry in the Next Generation rolled it more into the actual naval tradition of having various admirals, like rear admirals and upper half admirals and things like that. So I believe that's why it changed. That's what I had always heard. Was that in the Next Generation he just kind of went with what was actually more prevalent in naval tradition.
So then where does Commodore fall in naval tradition then? Because it's certainly not.
It doesn't exist anymore, as far as I know.
So it's kind of appreciated.
It was an old British naval rank that, like you said, it was kind of like
there you go.
Low-ranking admiral. It's just that it was a different word for admiral, more or less. Like with land-based forces, brigadier general would in the old days would be simply called brigadier. In some military.
So some of the other tags that I would like to see is a race tag. So you could have an NPC call the player by their race. You could say, you could
Vulcan
I've never liked Vulcans, and it's just I've never liked whatever race your player captain happens to be.
Yeah, the new KDF
tutorial and everything. Those missions use something to that effect, but I wish we had that. That's true. I wish we had that in the Foundry.
I played one of those as my Orion VA just to see what they were like, and I was kind of shocked when one of the NPCs I was fighting referred to my character as being an Orion.
Oh, I mean, it's even more than that. I mean, Cryptic can basically, I think, and they got this with the Legacy of Romulus, they can basically, have alternate dialogue based on race. So, for instance, now if you play through the, Romulan featured episode series with a Reman, I mean, there's options in there for you to say you want to join the Reman resistance. Or OPSEC will make it a plea about being the same race.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's more than just, they insert a little tag.
With the vault, there are actually alternate ways to proceed through the story's objectives for the vault, depending on whether you're a Romulan Republic player or not.
Well, we've got those. I don't know if you guys have ever spent any time in Neverwinter, but there are specific special triggers. They're like extra triggers on top of the normal ones that basically say this will only show up if you are a certain profession or you have a certain skill. And I can see something like that working perfectly for race. So this dialogue option will only show up if you are a Vulcan or something like that. Or this door will only be openable if you have or if you're a Andorian. Or even things like if your diplomacy is 4 or rank 4. So
that particular thing was one of the coolest parts of the 2800 mission series. The first part of the 2800.
Yeah, if you had that diplomacy rating, you got some more dialogue options available to you.
Yeah, and there was that one scene in the Romulan featured episodes. I think it was when you're infiltrating it was Mine Enemy, where you're infiltrating the Romulan base, and you basically have a chance to talk to the sub commander and basically convince her to go on your side. And it used to be when you first started out, unless you were rank 4, you would end up not being able to talk her down, and you would have to kill her. And I think they toned it down now, so it's not nearly as stringent. But yeah, I mean, it used to be. I mean, the only absolute diplomatic solution to that was if you had maxed out.
Well, yeah, because I mean, when those first came out, they were essentially made for end game players.
Yeah, that's true.
Players that were already at level 50 and had been for some time, and now they've been rebalanced to come in sort of the middle section when you're 30 something.
So a couple of other texts I'm kind of curious whether you would like is what about like a him, her, a his, her, those like that?
Mm-hmm. I've run into a couple of times when I have liked to have that. I would also like to have it refer to bridge officers.
That would be, bridge officer tag. That would be nice.
So I could refer to bridge officers as him or her depending on their race or their gender.
Or even just to be able to put in a tag that actually fills in your bridge officer's name instead of just,
And if we could, if we could have that in the NPC name, if we could add that,
like the way engineering name, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that would definitely be very nice. I don't even know if all of these are in Cryptic's engine yet. I can't think of a specific example of them having that as an option. Then again, they've added a bunch of new stuff with Legacy Romulus, so they could kind of do some of the interesting things with like Tovin and whatnot. So I don't know. I mean, it certainly can't hurt to ask.
One of the other things that I would like to see as far as tags go is the ability to put tags in buttons.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Yeah,
because I would like to be able to turn part of the text of a button green if it's the correct answer.
Yeah,
to a puzzle or something like that.
And this is something that Cryptic can already do.
Yes, they can already do that.
So yeah, I would love that.
All right, well, let's move it along. Our first discussion topic that I want to bring up is one that was submitted to us by Stouts. He says, have you ever copied or used another's idea? And if so, have you listed it as your own creation, or have you given credit to the original author who came up with the idea? And I've got a good example of this because I used a technique that I learned from playing Mission by Soridum, who we had on the show a few weeks ago. This is the technique of essentially using a space map as sector space. And you go to a point on the map and you do a trigger that drops you out of warp, does the little drop out of warp animation, and the star system spawns around you. Then you do a little warp out animation. That one despawns, you go to another point, and another star system spawns around you. Now, I don't have a thing in there that says, thanks to Soridem for coming up with this idea. But obviously, I did talk to him about it, that I was going to use it beforehand. So I mean, that partially because, I wanted to make sure it was okay with him to use it. And then partially because, I kind of thought I knew how he did it, and I wanted to make sure I had it correct. So I would say, I mean, as far as myself goes, I would say that anything technical, any technique for doing things in my missions, that's fair game. I don't care if people use that. In fact, I'd love it if people saw something cool in my mission and said, hey, I could do that. Obviously story things, I'm a little more reticent about, I don't want people copying my stories, but if, somebody approached me and said, hey, I'd like to use your character so-and-so in my mission, I'd be perfectly cool with that.
Yeah, that sort of thing is awesome. Just because someone else liked your character enough to want to do that.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know, have you guys, in your missions, used a technique that you saw in another author's mission?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I've said it before that, I found, Rogue Enterprise's missions to be very, inspirational, just kind of looking at how he takes on technical problems. No, I don't know that I did anything that was, like a complete copy of the exact same, or used it the exact same way. I tend to say, well, he's kind of using this to achieve that, but if I use this, I can also achieve this. I know, for instance, the trick he used did with and it basically intentionally killing the player to have them respawn, is something that
Such a brilliant trick.
It is a brilliant trick, and I thought of a cool way to use it in a little bit different manner.
Now, since you decided to use that cool trick that you saw in other authors' missions, do you feel like you should, maybe put a little acknowledgement to that author in the description or somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, like you, my general feeling on technical tricks is that tricks are kind of in this sort of Foundry public domain. If I do come up with anything and I publish it in a mission, it is fair game from a technical standpoint. The Foundry isn't a copyrighted thing, so I mean, coming up with cool ways to do different things is almost kind of a mandatory thing.
Yeah, well, things like that would be basically like trying to copyright 6mm bolts.
Yeah. But I mean, it's one of those things that the Foundry technical limitations are something that we kind of have to deal with, but it's also one of those things that the more that the community as a whole understands how to get around it, the better the overall missions can be made. So, it's one of those things that from a technical standpoint, we kind of need those to be public domain. I think that's all I can really say.
Well, it should say they're public domain only in a certain sense because, of course, Cryptic owns everything.
Yeah.
So in the sense of another person's character or story elements or things like that, one, ask the person, and two, if you do use it, definitely say thank you. But as far as like a cool trick of how to do something to make your mission look cooler and it makes it more super fun, I don't think on every mission that you use a trick that you learned playing a Rogue Enterprise mission or something, you need to be like, thanks, Rogue, for teaching me this trick. I mean, that's a little bit of overkill. But if you use an idea, like eventually I guarantee you put Helena in a mission. If I do that, it will only be because at this point I understand she's kind of like public domain. They made a DOF out of her that anyone can go get, but regardless, if and when I put that character into a mission in any way, I will have a line there somewhere that says, thank you to Havraha for creating this character. That's because I'm using someone's like creative, thing that their mind made, but as soon as they put it into the Foundry, part of signing that little, like, part of accepting the EULA is anything I put into the Foundry is now owned by Cryptic and you don't own it anymore, so people can do stuff with it. It's possible.
Yeah. Lawyers will never become involved in this.
Exactly. So the best you can do is the things that you feel like you should say thank you for them, because honestly, gratitude is one of the most amazing things in life to experience. Being thankful for something is awesome. So go do it when you feel like you need to. But if just using a trick that you learned, no, the fact that you learned that trick is the gift there, and like the community gift. Playing Rogue's missions have given me some ideas too, and eventually I'll be able to wrap my mind around ways to make it happen.
All right. Let's see. Moving on. Hippie, you had a topic for us, I think. If I recall.
Kind of. I guess it's like, how do you, any sort of genre that you can think of, whether here we are, today's the second day of October as we're recording this, and, so any genre, horror, the second day of October, horror genre, humor, romance, or, melodrama, or pulp, or any kind of genre you can apply to something has a feel to it, and not the same kind of humor or the same kind of horror, doesn't appeal to rather always the same people. And so my my discussion topic, I guess, is when you're writing something that is, humorous or a horror story or, or a romance story or whatever that type of story that you're aiming at is, how broadly do you try to appeal, and what do you do as, how do you try to appeal to the broadest group possible, I guess, and at what point does appealing to too broad of a group become something that limits you rather than liberates you as a storyteller and author?
In my case, I simply shy away from using story elements that I know would be some niche sort of thing. I don't necessarily try to make a mission have a broad appeal. I write something that I think would be good and avoid writing it into a niche, I guess is the best way to put it.
Okay.
I tend to write what appeals to me and sort of hope people will go along with it.
Kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I hope
and of course, you guys know me. I like everything. So.
So I'm going to try and, I think it would help to define what exactly, or give an example of what exactly a broad appeal mission looks like. And I don't have to go any further than Cryptic's own missions, because Cryptic, because they are the main content, have to maintain a broad appeal, because the entire player base is going to play them. So, a lot of people kind of tend to give Cryptic a lot of gruff that, Foundry missions are better written, or they're more willing to take more liberties or delve deeper into story than than Cryptic would. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Cryptic is forced basically to appeal to that broad audience. So in getting back to your question of what is the downside to trying to appeal to that broad audience is, it limits the amount of creative, unique things that you can do. You can't kind of pursue a very niche idea like you can. Your missions kind of have to follow more of the summer blockbuster theme of writing than they do the the Firefly form of writing.
Well, because it's kind of like doing the new Star Trek versus the old Star Trek, where in one of the episodes of the original series, we have this 20-minute dialogue talking about how the Cherons killed each other off and the philosophical implications of the destructive habits of the Cheron culture. Yeah, nobody would write that nowadays simply because of the fact that they know it would bore the audience to tears.
Yeah.
It's true. Audiences have changed over time.
Yeah, and even more so, you're right. Even in its time, Star Trek was aiming for a higher than average medium. So, there's a trade-off there. Obviously going back to the Firefly versus I'm trying to think of the latest summer. What was it? What was the summer blockbuster movie this year?
Star Trek Into Darkness.
Okay, let's go.
I really like what you said though about how just look no farther than Cryptic's own missions for what does it look like when you're trying to what happens when you're appealing to the broadest audience possible. And you point me at some of Cryptic's own missions and I see what you mean there.
Yeah, in fact, you can even argue that the Romulan missions were an attempt to kind of niche it a little bit, or kind of push past the normal broad appeal audience. And while they succeeded in many ways, there were still plenty of people who did not take well to it. And so,
it's mostly that people hate Tove and Kev for a variety of reasons that seem to be mostly.
I don't think it has anything necessarily to do with Tove and Kev.
But
he's an unpopular character, don't get me wrong, but I know why.
I was going to say that it has more to do with their own personality than with the game.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a step a little bit towards more of a niche, and the more specialized you get, the better it gets. But at the same time, the fewer people get it.
Mm-hmm.
This is definitely true, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about several episodes ago when we were talking about writing for non-traditional characters, where if you specialize, you're only going to appeal to a certain kind of audience, and not everyone who's going to play your mission is going to get that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd almost say it's often a sliding scale between, do you want a broad audience that kind of likes your mission, or do you want a very focused group of people who really like your mission?
Mm-hmm.
Unless, of course, you're like the Matrix, in which case you're aiming for a niche and then suddenly everybody likes it. But that's lightning in a bottle, basically. That is rarely planned.
It's just, I mean, I just see a lot of people make, one decision or the other, and I just wanted to hear why people make one decision over the other and what people think about it,
I usually just make the decision that if I was playing the mission, it would most appeal to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and maybe that's not always going to be the best decision.
I mean, I could never make a mission that I didn't like.
Right.
I think it's almost a given for an author. I mean, especially since we're not people who get paid to do this. I mean, if you are paid, then there's a certain amount of suck it up. They're buying your time. But
we're not making those Saturday night Sci-Fi Channel movies here. I assume somebody gets paid to do those. Otherwise, those horrible monstrosities would not exist, right?
Some of them suck less than the others do.
Yeah. So, but I mean, if you can't be enthusiastic about it, then really you're probably most likely going to burn out before you get to the end. And aiming for I want to say it's almost really hard to aim for a mission that does have broad appeal, because if you're aiming for broad appeal, you're aiming for other people's tastes. If you're making a mission that you want to play, then you're aiming for your own taste. Which of those two is easier to figure out?
I like your point. I do. I like your point a lot right there.
All right. Let's see, we had another topic. What was it?
Do we want to do the speculation one now, or do we want to do another one until?
It's kind of our big one.
Yeah, it's kind of our big one.
Our
speculation. Why don't you introduce it, Greendragoon?
So this week we gotta give a little nod to Foundry Files, because they gave a little nod to us. And in fact,
Foundry Files, we love those guys.
I do. But they also called us an optimistic podcast. First off, do you guys think this is true?
I fooled them all. I think it is true. I think in general we're a very optimistic bunch.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. My kind of feeling on that, and this is stuff that we kind of talked around behind, but really kind of brings the front, is we could go around and complain about everything that's wrong with the Foundry, but in the end, the Foundry would still have its problems, and we would just really feel bad about them. So we can do that, or we can try and do everything we can to make it seem like a better place. Or at the very least, try and make it a better place.
It's almost a guarantee that when things are wrong, even if they're little ridiculous things, that I'm gonna complain about them. I love that those guys laugh. They're like, the squirrel thing, haha, that's the funniest thing. And I'm like, that's my fault. The squirrel thing, that's my freaking fault. I did that. I did that because it was ridiculous, and I can't believe that's something that they actually fixed. It still shocks me, but yeah,
it was just a matter
I'll complain. I'll complain about things. Sometimes those things might sound rather ridiculous, but sometimes they won't be totally ridiculous, and they'll always feel very important to me.
I more than anyone was laughing at you for the squirrel thing, so.
I know. And then it got changed, but wow, I can't believe that's the thing that they took and said, yes, let's fix the squirrel thing.
Yeah, well, they told Cryptic Frost, and he's usually pretty diligent.
But we also we also told them why it was important, not because it's, not necessarily even because it's important to us, because literally we're there and we hear Cryptocross say, hey, it's an internal thing. We had them named squirrels when we were playing with them, internally here. And so, we heard him say that. Great. So we know the answer, and, it makes us giggle. But for other people who come into the game later on, it might be important.
There's also the aspect of the fact that having them named that way is just straight up confusing. So,
But did you say it's?
Yeah, you had a good point on that one.
But I think
it was a small
funny.
thing, but you had a good point.
I think it's funny that they found that something to laugh about. But yeah, we did get called out for being optimistic, and I said, "Ooh, they don't know me very well, or I have them all fooled." And really, what it comes down to is there's things to complain about, but overall, we have a Foundry that pretty much works okay. There are things that are difficult about it, and it's worth saying, having a big master bug list so that someone can keep track of what really is broken, and all of that is very good. All of that, I believe, is a very good step. We have a Foundry. How can we not be happy?
Here's something that I've never actually discussed, I don't think ever, is comparing the Star Trek Online Foundry to using the StarCraft mission editor. Because, in certain ways, the StarCraft mission editor did something similar.
It takes a lot of the background coding stuff and does it for you.
Right, but it lets you set up a map, it lets you set up objectives for the player to achieve, and whatnot. Of course, there's several issues with it. Like, one, you don't get to choose which of the armies on the map the player spawns with, apparently. I could
You used to be able to do that.
I only ever tinkered with it a few times, and it's been years, so,
So, Greendragoon, the other part of the...
This happened to be their 1-year anniversary, and they took the opportunity to make predictions for the next year of the Foundry from now. And they kind of challenged us to come up with a more optimistic prediction, which more or less amounted to nothing. So this shouldn't be very hard, actually. I don't think they both said nothing. I think Weeby said that he might see like a couple of minor things. But let's open it up here. 1 year from now, so let's say the beginning of October next year, what do you think will happen to the Foundry in that time?
Okay, so do they really want as optimistic as I possibly get? Because I can hit them with something they don't expect me to hit them with.
I would say, just say what you really think.
Here you go.
Could you convince yourself that it might happen?
This is what I think actually might happen based on history. Now, I'm going to say based on history because very recently with the launch of Legacy of Romulus, the Klingon faction got leveling content and PvE content. Now, it's not perfect. I know that it's not perfect. I know that we still don't have enough costumes and that stuff is still broken all over the faction. I get it. Other KDF players who ever listen to me, I know. I get it. I understand that the faction still needs work. But we did get this giant update of some really great new missions. Now, story-wise, from my personal sense, I think it's the best stuff that we got. I think the new Klingon story and the way that they wrapped it in together, which I'm pretty certain a lot of it was Dan Stahl. The way that they put it together with the old stuff and brought the new stuff in, it was beautiful, it was brilliant, and I loved it, and I think it's the best new story content that we've gotten. Now, he started talking about that a while ago as saying, look, I really am a Klingon fan, I'm not joking with you guys, I really am, this is the truth, this is what I really want to accomplish. And then as we started getting closer to them actually being able to accomplish it, he started talking about it more in detail. It was about a year out that he started talking about it in detail. And then as we got closer, he started talking about it in more detail about why it was his favorite thing. And he started doing things like going on Gates of Stovecore. And so here we are. We have a... Now apply all of this kind of history to the Foundry. You know, so what I'm saying is Stahl started talking about it, things started getting talked about, boom, there's this cool new Klingon stuff, even though, you know, like I say, I admit things aren't perfect. But that all, like the history of things, I see how they talk about things and how things start to happen. It's not a lie to say that it's kind of weird that Cryptic Frost pays so much attention to the Foundry. 'Cause he does. Which is great. Now, maybe that's just because he loves the Foundry and he pays a lot of attention to all of the bug reports that we make. That's super. But from a company sense, it's kind of weird to me that he pays so much attention to the Foundry. It's cool that he does, but here we have a QA guy who pays a lot of attention to the tool. Then we have very recently, as Season 8 is starting to approach, Gecko starts making tweet leaks about we're going to, you know, he's in meetings talking to people about the Foundry. Gecko is the lead designer on the game. He's got everything in mind. It's all in his purview somewhere as much as it is in anyone's purview. He's the lead designer. If he's in on the meetings, these are important meetings. And he talked about the fact that, you know, hey, pretty immediate, the things that he talks about being pretty immediate are, of course, going to be the closing of new exploits, which I know are out there, naughty exploiters. But they're starting to talk about the Foundry. We have a dev, so they want me to speculate what we might see a year from now. We have not a dev, we have a QA guy. We have a QA guy, and we have a Foundry community who's willing to keep updating and organizing and making sense of a list of bugs, of really important ones. And we have a QA guy who's paying a lot of attention to them and who, despite knowing that some of the things that he says are going to be an unhappy thing, like there will be no Romulan faction missions, sorry. He knew that was going to be unpopular. He came in there and he just said it. And you know what? We dealt with it. We're like, bummer, this sucks. But look at all the cool stuff we get. A year from now, that bug list is going to have been heavily addressed. That he was the one who started the asking for what costumes do you need. We're going to see a ton of ships and eventually ground costume choices. We're already starting to see some. There are more than just ships appearing. There are new costume choices in and among the NPC contacts I'm discovering as I'm making my missions that they haven't told us about, which, again, tell us about these changes. Tell us what we're getting, please. But I think that's what's going to happen, is we're going to see a lot. I don't know how much new tech we're going to see, but we have heard them talking about wanting to bring in new tech. So I think whatever ends up being possible, we're going to see them bring in. And I think optimistically, we're going to see some new tech. We're going to see a lot of new assets, a lot of new costumes, and we're going to see them actually care a little bit and show us that they do. But I don't think it's going to be huge. That's my guess.
You and I are actually in various. I don't know how many of the Foundry bugs will get fixed. I think they will try and hit the ones that are that can be fixed in a more reasonable amount of time. I think they'll run into other ones that are just like require more manpower than they can devote to it. I think Romulans at the moment are under that category.
Right. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think we will see one big fix. In fact, I'm going to make the prediction for Season 8 that one big feature, or the one big feature, I'm sorry, not fix. One big feature I think we will see for Season 8 is the Nudger. I think that's the most likely thing that they'll get in there that'll have the biggest impact.
You just want the Nudger.
No, I'm serious. I mean, okay, Dan gave 2 examples for tech they wanted to bring over from Neverwinter early on.
I know, and that's one of them.
Yeah, well, one of them. The other one is our custom interiors, and I know that is not a small task. And in fact, at one point during, I think it was one of Dan's interviews, he'd made comment about the process of looking into tech to bring over from Neverwinter, and he made the comment, "We're realizing that is a much bigger task than we originally thought." And I personally took that to mean we wanted to get in the custom interior editor, and then we discovered just how much work it's going to be to retrofit all of those interior pieces to fit into a grid system. I mean, you're talking a lot of artist time in there, on top of the programmer time to get the system in place. So of those two things, I think the nudger is much more likely, and something that we know was on their initial list going into this review.
Well, my thoughts as so, I'm not even going to try to guess at a year out, but a month or two out, I figure we'll probably get new assets added when Season 8 hits.
Yeah.
I mean, we're almost certain to get the new carrier ship that they're going to be giving people as part of that featured episode.
Yeah, I mean, we already got the Eladri ships, didn't we?
Yes. Granted, some of them are glitchy, but they're there.
Yeah, we got Malachi mobs and friendly Romulan and Reman mobs right when Legacy of Romulus launched. Of course, obviously, none of us could use them for 3 weeks.
Based on what Mark just said, maybe they are planning like a big costume or like ship and costume drop right when Season 8 hits, and they're waiting for Season 8 to hit, because when it does, they're going to say, hey, check out all of our cool stuff that just happened.
I mean, because they're going to be adding boss to the game, and doing an update to the costumes available in Foundry, it would kind of make sense to coincide with adding a whole bunch of new enemy or whatever costumes to the game, because, adding them to the Foundry at the same time, it seems like something that they might do.
They've been fairly consistent about getting us the new enemies fairly quickly.
Now that I think what they're doing now is when they add them to the game, they're adding them to the Foundry, which is probably a really wise idea. It just makes it happen.
They do on what they ought to do on maps and costumes and anything.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's limits to what they can fit in. I mean, it's not the primary goal. I think for Season 8, the Foundry will be a secondary goal. Like you would see like a secondary reputation system or something like that.
I don't think we're going to see a Foundry reputation for a while.
No, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant, but I meant that they set certain goals for each season, and there's usually a primary, and this is the thing that the season often gets named after, but then there are a couple of secondary systems that will get touched up or additions to or stuff like that. And that I think the Foundry is going to be one of those secondary goals.
Gotcha.
Now,
I can see that.
Looking beyond,
it's better than being a tertiary goal.
Looking beyond Season 8, because 1 year actually will include Season 9 as well. I've been trying to guess at remember I said that Dan had mentioned that they're realizing it's a bigger deal for them to get into one season. One could argue that means that we might see smaller Foundry updates for each season as they slowly kind of start to try and move over. I think they got into the Neverwinter Foundry, realized just how much stuff there was to port over, and so they said, okay, well, we can't do all of this in one season. We're gonna have to break it up into smaller bite-sized chunks. So I wouldn't be surprised if for the next couple seasons, and I will admit this is actually a very optimistic prediction, but I wouldn't be surprised if for next Foundry season we see smaller bite-sized Foundry updates, kind of coinciding along with the seasonal updates.
At the end of everybody telling us, what they think or whatever, let's also talk about what we wish might happen, because I have one of those too.
Well, that's sort of where I come in, because I posted it, and they made a thread asking for these predictions, the Foundry Files guys, and I posted in there that, in my opinion, I personally don't feel like I can and should predict things that I have no control over. Because, as players, we have no control over what Cryptic does. They're gonna do what they're gonna do. We can make suggestions all we want, and maybe they'll go with them, maybe they won't. But, obviously, there are things in life that I have control over. In Foundry, what happens to the Foundry is not one of them. So I don't feel like I can make predictions. However, I have many, 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 many things I would love to see happen, but I don't expect them. I will just enjoy them if they do happen.
Right.
So, and the thing that I would like to see them most of all is for them to find a way to limit the downtime and damage from big updates.
Ooh, I like that. That's a good wish.
That would be a tough one.
I think they have been doing that, actually, because, let's face it, when have they ever had an update that was as bad as the Season 4 one?
Well, it depends on who you ask, because there are a lot of people who just absolutely could not stand those long load times, and those stuck around for 3 or 4 months.
I don't know. Well, I don't know
that really got to a lot of people.
It was a couple months.
Yeah.
It was 3 at least.
Well,
it
and the
almost
downtime,
defeated,
and the downtime,
it
of
almost
course,
completely defeated me.
Yeah,
I have to
was
admit.
one of those guys. And I would like to see, and I don't know, maybe more manpower is the thing. If more manpower was on that problem, maybe it would have gotten fixed faster, but I don't know that.
Yeah.
Obviously,
though, is that when Season 4 hit on the live server, the Foundry and everything related to it was completely offline for over a month. We've never had anything that bad since then.
Yeah, it's 5 weeks. I know because I counted.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot
I was there and I counted. And it was 5 weeks. There was a lot of damage. There was a lot of authors that were fantastic authors that just left and have never been back since.
Yeah, well, I mean, my oldest mission is something that I created before then. I mean, I actually wrote out the basic plot of the mission. I mean, I've tweaked it heavily since then, but it's something that I wrote during season.
Yeah, I'll tell you one good thing about Season 4 is it gave me time to write a script. Because I couldn't build anything.
I just wonder if there isn't something that we as authors can be better about. Because, I mean, part of the issue is identifying these problems sooner. And in fact, and that would be getting on Tribble and actually testing these things, which of course is really hard because most of us don't have.
Here's the thing is that the long load times was found on Tribble and reported by Captain Revo.
Mm-hmm.
It did not receive a response and obviously was not fixed on Tribble.
Yep.
Now I get the sense that, they weren't going to focus on Foundry related things because of the size of that update.
Yeah.
And I can cut them a little slack for that.
Glitch was that Cryptic had no idea what was causing it, and they decided that focusing on it was unproductive if they were going to have a programmer poke around at it for a week just to figure out what the heck was going on.
So I think they decided that it was better to have the Foundry available, even if it was long load times from the pits of forever. Even if it was long, like they figured it was better to have it than to not have it. That's the only thing I can see for it going on so long with them just not addressing it. It's the only explanation to me is why it could go on that long.
But you are correct, Greendragoon. I mean, we do need to make sure that everybody gets on Tribble and checks things in the Foundry, especially because, I mean, there's so much stuff that isn't in the patch notes. And, I did get a tweet from Brandflake saying he had passed on that feedback to the relevant people, but we still need to check these things, because otherwise we may not find them.
I'm still of the theory that this is Season 8 stuff that's slipping out.
That's what I'm saying is, like, maybe this is, maybe they're into, this is the stuff we're gonna see. These new costumes and stuff.
I'm looking at the general chat forum right now, and I noticed that they mentioned something about how if you go on Tribble, you can play one of the missions in the Dyson Sphere already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that was put up on Tribble on Friday. I have played it, and it's pretty cool, I gotta say, even though I think some of the art is placeholder art. That's what Taco Fangs has said.
That's what they said, yeah.
But it's really cool, and I hope we get some of those assets to play with.
I still need to get on and play it.
Sometimes you can have trouble finding a group for it. because
well, at the moment Tribble's limited to subscribers.
Yep.
One thing that I would greatly like to see them add is the ability to make space maps that have a ground platform, because that's one of the things that they've been adding in recent updates. Because like there's the mission where you fly a shuttle in a planet's atmosphere, and now the new Dyson Sphere map where you're doing ship to ship combat above this giant structure.
Yeah.
I mean, and you have to fly around the pieces of the giant structure that you're fighting on. So it feels a lot like a hybrid of a ground and a space map, and it'd be really cool if we had the ability to do that in Foundry without doing tricks like what that one person did to make that giant trench in space to fly through while fighting.
Yeah, that's the thing is, like, we have a lot of things that we want, and I prefer not to have expectations, not to have predictions, so that I'm not disappointed if I don't get it, but I'm, pleasantly surprised if I do. That's my outlook on things, and I don't know. Some people call it optimistic, some people call it pessimistic, some people call it fatalistic. I have no idea. It's just how I am.
So my wish that I think, I don't really foresee happening, but the thing that Dan Stahl talked about, it's almost a year old now, his interview with Primetime UGC. If you guys remember that, where he talked about a whole sector of space, the founders of the Federation using the Foundry to basically, it was kind of what he was talking about sounds a lot like what Neverwinter is, because he was talking about, like, you fly up to Ferenginar and there are a bunch of Foundry missions that take place on Ferenginar that you then have access to. You fly up to, Beta Z and all of those founder planets that he was talking about that. And so I'm hoping, my wish is that any kind of a big update comes with that idea along with it. He talked about a whole sector block dedicated to something called the Founders of the Federation. And that's just about a year old now that he talked about that. And that's my wish, is that something to do with that, there's some movement on that sort of thing.
So I just kind of had an idea, is what if our version of the Harpers was those transport captains flying around in sector space? So if there's ones flying around the Sirius sector, you talk to one and he tells you that he's heard a few things around the sector.
That would be cool.
And then it comes up with the list of 300 missions.
I wish you could interact with those Talarian ships that I see flying around Sirius. Yeah.
I think they should put one of those in every sector.
Yeah, I mean, or maybe just have like a Federation starship that's flying through, and you can hail them, and they give you some missions you can do. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of.
That's my wish, is that we get something like the Harpers, I guess. Yeah.
I think it would help integrate the Foundry with the game.
Yeah.
I think anything we can do to do that more is a benefit to all of us.
Yeah.
To the devs, to us, to the players, everybody. All right, guys. Well, I think this is a good place to say goodnight.
Indeed.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.